Hello Internet, and welcome to my live reaction for Fire Force Chapter 276. When we last left our heroes, more Doppelgangers were coming, thanks to the mass suicide of the Cataclysm Force. We see specifically that Benimaru was landed, at least like 7 have landed. So it's more than just what we saw at the end of 274. But Sho, I think, kind of goes to deal with that and then tells Shinra to A, put a shirt on, and B, go fight Haumea and the Evangelist and end the Cataclysm. Before we can see that, though, we learn that Nataku has also been freed from Adola. And he lands somewhere in Tokyo, tries to find anyone, specifically Kurono, and he stumbles on Kurono's Doppelganger, who specifically has a line, when Nataku calls him a fake. Kurono is like, what's really the difference between a real and, like, can the imitation not subsume the original, thanks to, like, perception or whatever? Which I did remark as being somewhat similar to what happened to Shinra during that 6-month time skip we didn't really see. So yeah, all that in mind, let's dive right on into Chapter 276, Imitation. And our picture here is of Kurono kind of staring down dispassionately. Part-time Reaper, part-time office worker. Only one man knows that life. The man known as Kurono. And so we open where we left off, with Nataku still kind of yelling at Kurono, "You're just a sham of the real Kurono." And Kurono counters, "But can you really declare me just a sham? I'm the people's perception of him given form. I'm the Kurono everyone else knows. It doesn't matter if I replace him. The only people who will care about that stuff are the ones close to him. The imitation just has to beat the original. We live in a world where victory forgives all. Victory's what matters. If I win, I'll become the original." So so that's kind of counter to what I was sort of thinking last week, in that that he's not saying, he's sort of physically subsumed the original, like we kind of saw with Shinra back post 216. But just that if he kills the real Kurono, who, besides Nataku and that one supervisor guy, is really going to know the difference? So yeah, it's not quite as complicated as what I was thinking. And Doppel Kurono just grins. "The imitation will seep into the world before people even realize it." And Nataku is kind of stunned there. And in his mouth, we see the Rekka eye. And the ghost of Rekka appears beside him. That's right. If you're that scared, you might as well just agree. Come on, you can overcome this." So I'm trying to remember exactly how Ghost Rekka was sort of manipulating Nataku in the past. Was it, cause it seemed kind of a try harder and overcome, which this Ghost Rekka says, but in a decidedly non-try harder way is what this Rekka is saying. Just give up is what he's saying. And I don't seem to recall that being the flavor of dialogue we got from Nataku's Rekka in the past. But also, it's been 2 or 3 years since that chapter, and those chapters, my memory might not be completely perfect. Anyway, Kurono kind of sneers at Nataku. "Are you scared of the original being destroyed? The only ones who care about the original disappearing are the ones who knew them. And in this wide world, they only amount to a speck." And at this point, Doppel Kurono's eyes are kind of starting to light on fire. And what's kind of reminiscent of what we've seen from Burns in the past. But maybe that's just sort of a random choice, because on the next panel, we don't really see that sort of flame up thing. Anyway, Kurono continues, "Thinking about the real Kurono disappearing scares you, doesn't it? Does it fill you with despair?" And we see Nataku really starts to sweat here. "Well, your fake Uncle Death's off to eliminate the real one." And Kurono turns to leave, and Nataku calls, "Wait!" But then Kurono somehow gets behind him, or maybe this is the real Kurono. He grabs Nataku and just throws him, notably not sneering, like the fake Kurono did. And Nataku looks up, confused and shocked. And yeah, it is the real Kurono. Nataku, again, uncomfortably happy to see the man who's been abusing him for several months now. "Kurono-san!" And Kurono looks at his doppelganger. "Don't tell me this is my doppelganger." And the doppelganger grins. Now, so I've been just calling Kurono because he was the only Kurono around. But now the doppelganger is here, I'm going to swap to saying the doppelganger instead of Doppelkurono or just being confusing. Anyway, the doppelganger grins. I'll destroy you and then plunge the sixth pillar into despair. And Oguro is his name, as we see. The manager walks in. All right, Nataku-kun, stand back. Oguro-san? Pretty sure he can manage. And the two Kuronos just stare each other down. The doppelganger makes the first move. Hey, yeah! Let me see it. I'll torture you to death. And Kurono just sort of stares dispassionately, and deflects the knife, the smoke knife that the doppelganger has sort of created with his own knife. And Kurono sends this like wall of smoke at the doppelganger and goes into it. We can only really see the doppelganger's eyes as he taunts, "Your smoke is my smoke too." And Kurono's kind of shocked at that. And the smoke kind of I think the doppelganger took control of that smoke. And it blows past the two of them, allowing the doppelganger to get a pretty big cut on Kurono, given the size of that, given the amount of blood we see there. Though his face isn't terribly scratched, we just see like a minor cut on his cheek as he looks back at the doppelganger. And the doppelganger leers, "More blood! Show me! Ha 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 ha!" And he like licks the blood off of the knife, which is just a step too far for Kurono. I do like, though, that Nataku kind of pointed out one of the big differences between the doppelganger and the real Kurono is that the real Kurono doesn't really take joy in his douchebaggery. He kind of sees it as a fact of life. Whereas the doppelganger is just, like, having a great time. He's laughing, he's dramatically licking blood off his knife, like the most cliche villain you've ever seen. And just seeing his own body do that doesn't really, elicits a less than happy reaction in Kurono. The doppelganger teases, "What's the matter, Kurono? Ready to be replaced? If you're not careful, the fake's going to become you." And Kurono kind of looks at the doppelganger. Is this really the impression I give? Huh? It's like some B-movie psycho. He called it out. He called it out. Good shit. Good shit, Kurono. You may be an absolute bastard. You may be one of the, from a moral standpoint, worst characters in this franchise. But sometimes you're right. And the doppelganger responds, "That's how people see us. Think of me as a surface-level recreation of Yuichiro Kurono. Even if I replace you, nobody else will give a damn." But Nataku counters, "What about the original, or the people who know him? Some people will care." But the doppelganger readies a new weapon. "Humanity's a bunch of sticky-fingered thieves. You really think any of them would even care if I stole your existence?" We're seeing there, though, a taste of the nihilism that sort of Sumire and Victor, to a lesser extent, have kind of sort of embodied lately. Just something to keep in mind. "History is written by the victor." He makes another slash at Kurono that he barely dodges. "It doesn't matter what you do. The world's always been that way." Nataku calls, "Kurono-san, finish him!" And the doppelganger grins. "You think a bunch of non-establishment nobodies will care? A bunch of unthinking, ethicless nobodies could never make that judgment." Which again is tying into the establishment as the concept of a main character in a manga. Which is, again, really, really... It's a sort of thorny issue. Given my general stance on the idea that only certain people matter, which works for them. It works when the series is dealing with its more meta aspects. But this chapter isn't quite as meta as some of those. It's not really dealing with this world as a story, as like Victor or Shinra have put it in the past. And so, while I'm still like generally not super opposed, thanks to all of that work of this is an incredibly meta manga at this point, just the idea that only certain people matter, you know, from a real life standpoint, always has rubbed me the wrong way. A fun note here I noticed, though, is carrying on with the idea that the doppelganger is just the perception of Kurono as the Reaper. The doppelganger uses a scythe. I hadn't noticed that earlier, but his weapon that he forms at the bottom of 15 is a scythe. as opposed to the knives that the real Kurono uses, which is a really nice touch. Anyway, from like the handle of the scythe, a like spear pops up, thanks to the fact that it's just kind of solidified smoke. Kurono barely dodges out of the way, but the doppelganger just keeps laughing. Yeah, die, die, die! And we see somehow he blasts Kurono back with like a puff of smoke. And Kurono kind of collects himself. You and I differ in two ways. Firstly, no matter how much power I might have, I've never intended to use that power to be inhumane. What? I mean, okay, I talked earlier about, and Nataku mentioned last week, about how Kurono doesn't see, he just sees his evilness as being part of, like, the natural order of things, or whatever. But still, to hear Kurono come out and say, I never intended to be inhumane, is a lot. And then Kurono then says, and secondly, I'm an upstanding office worker, not a psycho. And the doppelganger calls him out. The hell are you talking about? You bully little kids! And Kurono dodges it, which is, at the end of the day, part of my job. I have my company's permission to bully children. Okay, there is so much going on in those two sentences that I don't really have the ability, I think, to really parse out. There's a lot going on there. In other words, I'm societally permitted to bully the weak. What the actual fuck? And the doppelganger responds, well, I'll be permitted to replace you. Which does sort of, kind of maybe get at the issue with Kurono's I can do anything if society is okay with it. Because if the doppelganger is right, the society will be a-okay with Kurono being replaced. Then yeah, he has he has the same justification towards bullying, towards replacing Kurono that Kurono has towards being an asshole. It's a lot. It's a lot to kind of take in, but it is what it is. But Kurono counters, that's never going to happen. Maybe they'd be ignorant and content. Maybe they'd go along meekly, not pay any mind. Maybe they're all like you said, preconditioned by their humanity to be a bunch of thieves. Who knows? But he readies his next attack, but those nobodies aren't the ones you need permission from. It's the one you're trying to replace, which happens to be me. And we see he readies his own smoke weapon, this time with like skulls kind of forming from the smoke. Now let me give you my answer. It just wasn't meant to be. I'm gonna need you to leave this world. And he readies his own scythe. The Reaper's scythe shines. Reap the life of that bragging, thieving double. To be continued after 277, ripoff or homage. So let's talk about that title real fast, and how it sort of deals with some of the things he talked about in this chapter, and specifically the meta-ness of Fire Force, in that deliberately referring to its own characters as a ripoff or an homage sort of deals with the fact that these characters are characters in a story, and the show is very, very aware of the fact that these characters are characters in a story. We see that over and over and over and over again through this final arc, and that's very much what this whole thing is kind of getting at. Which does a lot to sort of kind of work to dispel my unhappiness with the whole nobodies thing. I mean, that's always going to be a not great way of phrasing that. I would like if at a certain point they just called them background characters. Like, the show has gotten so meta with the characters acknowledging that it's a story. At a certain point, you can just say they're background characters. You don't have to say non-establishment and establishment. You can say background characters and, like, important characters. And I think if it was a bit more upfront about that, my sort of wariness towards what could be interpreted as a very kind of uncomfortable, maybe nihilism. I've used the term nihilism. I'm not quite sure that's quite the right phrase. But somewhere in that kind of concept is what I'm really uncomfortable about with this arc, and with this climax. But we also see more of that meta going in, we see more of the meta throughout, in that that Kurono refers to the Doppelganger straight up as a B-movie psycho. And to be fair, this is the Doppelganger, that's besides, say, Shinra's Doppelganger and Iris, is the easiest to say, hey, that's just people's interpretation of him. Hog, I can never quite understand why Doppelhog would be attacking Tokyo if Hog was a big protector of Tokyo. Hibachi, I could kind of see as I could see how the population of the Empire could see Hibachi's disdain for the Empire as disdain for the world. And also, even without that, his disdain for Tokyo and Asakusa's kind of subsumation by Tokyo could lead Hibachi to be angry at Asakusa. Like, that all works, but you kind of have to kind of squint at it to make that really work. Rekka can also kind of see... Hog was the one that really just didn't track at all, as unimportant as his doppelganger was. But, not since Shinra's doppelganger has it been quite so apparent how the perception is influencing this doppelganger. With his just pure-on insanity, as opposed to the kind of subtle critique of office work, I guess. I mean, there's definitely... Now I'm going to talk about page 18 here, which I've kind of been dancing around, but that's as good a segue as I'm going to get. And, I feel like if I, A, knew a bit more about Japanese office culture, and B, had a bit more time than a live reaction really allows to kind of dig into this page, I could kind of explore this page and the next, but Kurono in general, that's sort of the critique of Japanese office culture. And someone who has more time and is more knowledgeable about that, I would absolutely love it if you could write a comment about that. I think that'd be a really interesting read. But I also don't know enough about it to sort of say one way or the other. Yeah, I mean, other problems with this chapter are just sort of the Kurono Nataku dynamic it's a lot. And it's the kind of things I'm more than a little uncomfortable with it at this point. I remember not being super uncomfortable with it during the Haijima arc. It sort of stuck out as, the least awful solution to all of these problems. But now, with, 2 years plus hindsight, it's a lot. It's a lot, and it's easily... Honestly, I'm gonna say it's the most uncomfortable thing in this series, even beyond some of Tamaki's Lucky Ledger shit. It's the most uncomfortable thing in this manga, is Kurono and Nataku's dynamic. It's just a lot. It's weird, it's really uncomfortable. And I know many people are not going to be happy with this fight at all until it's just kind of gone. Especially as, sort of the follow-up of Arthur Dragon, anything's gonna be a little bit down. But Kurono is just a lot to take in for really anyone. But the fight itself is a lot of fun. I like the sort of little details we get showing how the doppelganger is different from the real Kurono. I think that's really nice sort of visual details. Because I don't think, before this final panel, we ever see Kurono use the scythe. I don't think we've seen that before, which would fit if he had never thought to use the scythe, and then he sees his doppelganger use the scythe, and he's like, maybe that's not a bad idea. Or maybe it's just Okubo wanting to write a Maka Albarn fight again. Maybe, I don't know. It's been a long time since I watched Soul Eater. But yeah, a lot going on here. Kurono is just a lot, but there is a lot of good things going on here too. All in all, it's a fun chapter. If you can get past the Kurono Nataku dynamic, which again, no shame if you really can't. So yeah, that's all I gotta say for this video. Hope you all enjoyed the chapter and the video itself. If you did, feel free to drop me a like or subscribe, do whatever makes it happy, And remember, your life is your own, okay? Bye!